Hello, we're live on the Tech Guy off the radio, and we're live several minutes before I'm supposed to be live because I'm trying to dodge the censor. As you may or may not know, last week we started the podcast, and 5 minutes in, it suddenly died. So what I'm doing now is I'm basically not announcing it when I would normally announce it. I'm about to make I'm about to do the podcast post. So live stream. So I'm trying to do 2 or 3 things at once. I'm trying to post all the live stream stuff pretty much at the same time in order to minimize the possibility of people screwing me up. Because last week, literally 5 minutes into the podcast, suddenly all the connections died to you. Now, I should point out only the connections to YouTube died. All my other net connections were working fine. But for some magical mystery reason, my YouTube connections didn't work. And suddenly my podcast about Twitter and Twitter safety and getting locked out and the censorship and all that other stuff that I was dealing with suddenly disappeared. Well, totally unexpectedly, of course, because there's absolutely no chance that anybody would be trying to censor me or keep me from putting out something to support what was going on, or to keep me from getting myself locked out by Twitter again while I'm doing the podcast. Because we all know that people don't do that sort of stuff. After all, there's no reason for them to even think of doing that sort of stuff because the presentations we're making are so weak and so, it's so ridiculous that there's no reason for them to censor us at all, right? And that's one of the topics I'm going to be discussing today. Because that's, one of the things, people do things for a reason. There's a great scene from the movie The Longest Day, one of the great movies concerning the Normandy landings. And it talks about diversions. And one of the points that they make is when you make a diversion, it's for a reason. Okay, I'm going to have to get rid of one of those links before I tweet this out. I think I've done in there twice, so let's erase that one. Okay, I want to stop this. STL. See if we can get a few bodies in there. Actually, what we'll do is we'll shrink that. And again, I do apologize for those of you who've jumped in and are seeing nothing but me typing and seeing me pause. I'm just trying to get everything done in a way to minimize the chances of me being censored before the fact. Because I've reached the point now where I'm Sicilian. I shouldn't be trusting people anyways. But I'm also very Catholic. And part of that is love and trust. So we're going to do that. And I'm going to put the links now on Citizen Free Press and on Whatafinger. And get them all out there. What do you mean I must be logged on? Seriously? This is where we're at? I was already logged on. I literally just posted another post. So we're going to try this one more time to get this on Whatafinger. But it should not be. It theoretically should not be a problem. But anyways, I want to mention that we had to do the podcast early anyways because of the horrible, absolutely terrible Trump economy, which has meant that this week, all week, we've been working until instead of getting out at midnight, which is the normal time to get out, we've been getting out at 2 in the morning. And mind you, this is the time of year when we're normally doing 30 hours a week. Instead, I was okay, and I'm going to list the topics over there. So this horrible, nasty, no good Trump economy that if, by the way, the attempts to stop the steal fail, you're going to miss this economy because there's a reason why we have prosperity, and it isn't, and that reason has nothing to do with Joe Biden. Let's put it that way. Stop the steal, live stream, podcast, blog, election 2020. We'll just leave it at that because I want to get that up so people can see it. All right. So all of the side. Oh, forgot to select the category. So we'll put it under opinion because it's a live stream podcast, and opinion would be appropriate. Okay, all of that is in. Let's see if the YouTube thing. No, it hasn't dropped. YouTube hasn't dropped. So we're 6 minutes in. We're doing better than last week, where everything mysteriously stopped 5 minutes in. But actually, I say so. I'm working another shift today. Yesterday was the only day we did not work till 2 in the morning. We've been coming in a little bit later. Instead of 3:30 to midnight, it's been 4 to 2 in the morning. And I've got to say, yesterday I was incredibly exhausted. I got into work. The first day was all right because you've already had your regular day's rest. The second day was harder because now you haven't had the rest. The third day was even harder, and the fourth day, which was going to be the last day till 2 a.m., I got to work and I was literally dreading working. And they've added an attendance bonus, so now you have an incentive to stay and not try and leave early. And I got transferred to the department that's been busy. And then all of a sudden, as I go to that department, they say, "Oh, by the way, we're leaving at 12:30." And I look at my boss, my supervisor, and I say to the young lady, "I know this is inappropriate to say, but right now, if it was not inappropriate, I'd kiss you full on the lips and dance with you over that nose," because I was literally that happy to not be working till 2 in the morning. And I literally ended up dancing around and singing. But what's really funny is this. I had been locked out of Twitter earlier that day, and I had purposely timed my lockout, figuring, all right, they lock you out for 12 hours. I'm going to do my appeal when I get home. I'm going to get home around 2:15 in the morning. So I timed my thing so that the lockout would end just before 2 in the morning. And I'm driving home. I drive some people to work. I'm driving home, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, now I'm going to have to stay up to appeal my lockout. And I don't really want to stay up to appeal my lockout, although I should, because I'm just so tired. Well, I say, I'll just run through McDonald's quickly. Well, luckily for me, for some reason, McDonald's had all kinds of problems. So they took them 20 minutes to make me a double cheeseburger, a small fry, and 4 chicken McNuggets. So by the time I got home, there was only 15 minutes left to wait. So I put on the Quiet Man and watched that for a little while and did my appeal. And the amazing thing about my Twitter appeal, now remember, this has been the 5th time they had locked me out since the election. A 5th time. I got an email, and if you go to the blog post which announces the podcast, you'll notice the little image at the top. We have received your Twitter appeal. It's 11 today at 2 a.m. Less than a second later, your account has been restored. Now, what's very funny is the last time they locked me out. By the way, I'm in the bedroom today because the wife didn't get much sleep. So I wanted to be away from her so that I don't wake her up. She's crashed on the recliner today. And she's been having some back troubles. So it's hard for her to sleep in the bed, which really stinks. I got to tell you, it really stinks. So we're up here in the bedroom. But literally, it took less than a minute for them to unlock me. And that's the second time that's happened. Although the previous time that I was locked out, they waited a whole day. And the reason they waited a whole day was because I had pointed out that they are not only auto-locking people for tweeting out the Bedford's log post, but they are auto letting them back in. And I wrote about it. I literally had the timestamps. Here's the thing, the email. Here's the receiving of it. Here's the lockout. And so I suspect somebody decided, we better make them sweat for a day. And I am so uncomfortable. It's not funny, but we're going to move this around a little bit. And yes, like I said, I'm in the bedroom. I'm lying down because I've had a long week and it's been tiring. But let's talk a little bit about the topics we said we were going to talk about as we're back on the podcast. And I do want to thank you for joining us. Again, this is not our normal podcast time. Normally, I would have started a Donald Trump edition. I should say the Trump economy edition. I would normally have started it at 11. I started it purposely now. Again, I'm trying to dodge the censors. I'm trying to dodge getting unexpectedly locked out, unexpectedly having these things happen. So I figure I'll do the podcast now. I'll do it live now. Maybe they'll lock me out again. Maybe they won't. Maybe, and it's possible that it was just a coincidence. It might be just a coincidence that while all my other internet connections were fine, while all of everything else was working fine, that YouTube, after 3 days announcing that I was going to test Twitter to see if they'll lock me down again, and I'll test it live on my live stream, it's just a coincidence that live stream just not only died, the connections died, but my attempt, I recorded the whole thing. I actually went on an hour. But when I tried to save it and tried to upload it, it was all gone. What a coincidence. And that's one of the pieces, in my opinion, pieces of evidence and one of the pieces of circumstantial evidence that the case for election fraud is strong. And let's be blunt. Yes, this election was stolen, but the dirty little secret about the stealing of this election isn't so much that the election got stolen. The dirty little secret is that the president demonstrated what an unstolen election was like 4 years ago. And I talked about this a while back, that the reason why we had a Donald Trump presidency in the first place is because everyone was convinced, and I mean everyone, that Hillary Clinton had the last election in a walk. So they didn't bother to put in the stuff in place. You didn't need the infrastructure in Philadelphia to steal an election. You didn't need the infrastructure. You did not need to risk a federal offense to steal an election that you figured it was already won. So they didn't bother. And when Trump suddenly started, that's why everyone suddenly started getting worried. That's also why so many, you'll notice the same states that they waited on, and that they stopped the count on in 2020 are the states that they waited forever to call last time. And they waited forever to call because it was a question of, can we steal enough ballots? Do we have the time to steal the ballots? And they didn't. There was no way to credibly get the infrastructure in place to steal the ballots in time. So Hillary conceded. That's why. But now they had 4 years to prepare. They had 4 years to get ready. They had 4 years to get all these things done. And now you have a stolen election, or you have the potential for a stolen election, because the election is not yet stolen. It is not yet, the electoral count has not yet taken place. This has not yet gone to the Supreme Court. And let's cut to the chase in one respect. Nothing is settled yet. Nothing I say on this podcast, and I hate to drop myself down here, but nothing I say on the podcast is going to make a difference in terms of how the courts are going to rule. Nothing that anyone says on Fox, nothing that anyone says on CNN, nothing that anyone says on CBS, ABC, NBC, PBS, New York Times, none of those things are going to make a difference. What's going to make a difference is what does the Supreme Court do and what do the state legislatures do? Donald Trump has two paths to the White House after the 20th of January. Two paths. And let's not kid ourselves. Neither of them are easy. Neither of them are easy. The first path, the nice path, would be court victories, either at the state or federal level. Court victories in Wisconsin, in Arizona, in Pennsylvania. Georgia would be nice, but not necessary. In Georgia, in Michigan. Court victories where the challenge to the election or the challenge to the ballots that were submitted illegally, and I'm not going to reiterate everything Rudy said. You can see the video of what was done and the presentation that was given, and you can see what they've already said, and more importantly, what people have said under oath. But I'm going to elaborate on that a little bit more. But you can see what's been done. You can see the general case and where this is going. What only matters, though, is what the courts say. There's a lot of spin for it, but what matters is what the courts say. But there's another group that matters, too. The other group that matters is public opinion, because, and I'm going to say this bluntly, if I thought this election was not stolen, I would object to I don't object either way. Everyone's saying, well, none of us object to the president doing all of his legal things here. That's a nice way of saying, please just go through the process and go away. Because a lot of people do not want some of this stuff revealed. And some of them are Republicans, either because they have connections to Dominion, either because they've let this stuff go on for so long, or either they've used these processes themselves to steal their own elections. Let's not pretend that there are people who don't have an interest in things going this way. Let's not pretend that there are people on the conservative or Republican side who think that they have a better chance of holding office or getting money if there's a Biden presidency. Let's not pretend that. There are those who have those who seek those advantages. But so you have the courts on the state level, and the second place, and the Supreme Court, which is the first place where it's going to be decided. And the second place is going to be in the state legislatures, because the Constitution gives the absolute power to the state legislatures. But again, the other thing is public opinion matters, because as I was about to say before I interrupted myself, if I thought this election wasn't stolen, then I would want Trump to concede, because I wouldn't want him to steal an election. I would not want a stolen election because it would undermine American democracy. That's the difference between me and the left. And we've already seen a piece that was mentioned on Instapundit, and I mentioned it in my own piece this morning, that we've already got a third of Democrats who believe this election was stolen. And Sarah Hoyt asked the question, we don't know if they disapprove of it being stolen. See, that's the thing. That's the sad part about this. And this is where this is sort of what happened to the Catholic Church when you didn't catechize people, and suddenly you had a bunch of people who don't know what the faith is, which is why my priest at my parish will be doing 3 weddings over the next 12 months versus 20 weddings over 12 months when he was younger. We don't catechize people. We don't tell people the truth. People don't learn the history of America, civic life in America. They don't get what's at stake here. And what's at stake here is big. But anyways, the president's path to a re-election is to either win in the courts or to convince the state legislatures to send their own electors. Now, some people are talking about that as very far out. Now, I give them maybe a 1 in 3 chance of succeeding in this, because this is not easy. This is not going to be easy. Anyone who tells you this is a slam dunk, and I know, and it's not a question of whether or not the evidence is a slam dunk. It's a question of, are the courts willing to do it, and will the legislatures have the guts? I mean, you already saw the intimidation at the Michigan Canvassing Board. if you have people who are not willing to rock the boat, who are afraid of being exposed themselves, or who are being leaned on, because remember, you're going to have some people who will publicly say, "Oh, we're all behind you," and privately be working to undermine them. This is what we've seen. We've seen this many times. Tip O'Neill wrote about this in his book Man of the House when he was campaigning for John McCormick against Kennedy for Congress. And Kennedy, after the elections, because Kennedy had approached O'Neill many times, said, "Tip, I want you to be with me." So no, I'm staying. I'm over here with damn well going to carry East Cambridge. And they carried East Cambridge, clobbered everywhere else. And Kennedy said to him after, "I can't tell you how many people were publicly for my opponent, but working sub rosa for me. I know that you're loyal, so because you wouldn't do that. So next time I want you on my side because I know you're worthwhile." We don't know who's sub rosa for the other side. We don't. We're going to find out. Now, in order to, the most important thing is one of the reasons why we're seeing the censorship. And again, let's use simple logic. If people are saying something nuts, if you want to persuade people that a person is a nut, and that person is a nut, you know what you do? You let people see them. If someone is ranting crazily, and you want to discredit that person, you let them rant. You let them show people that they're nuts. If a person wants to display that they're nuts, you let them do it. If people want to make ridiculous charges, yeah, you'll get a 1% of the crazy uncles to buy it, but that's nothing. If the other side argument is so poor, so weak, you let them show it. The fact is, the argument for voter fraud is not weak. The argument is strong. The argument for election fraud on a grand scale isn't weak, it's strong. The argument for the Dominion systems isn't weak, it's strong. Because it's strong, people are trying to censor it. People are trying to discount it. People are trying to keep you from seeing it. Because if it was weak, they would be very, very happy to let you see it. If their argument was weak, it would not be getting censored because people would want to see a weak argument. If you're trying to win an argument, you want a bad argument out there. It's one of the reasons why I never block people on Twitter, because when the left's making a bad argument, which is usually most of the time, I don't want to block them. I want the people who follow me to see it because it's a bad argument. If it's a bad argument, I can win that argument every time. So I leave them there. That's why I never block people on Twitter, even people I don't bother with anymore. And like one of the people I don't bother with anymore is Brown Sugar 6868. And I used to have her on my actual radio show. She would be the pundit coming from the left. I invited her on because we would talk on Twitter nice. But then during the election, during the aftermath here, he was going on about Biden this, Biden that. And I said, let's be blunt. Let's cut to the chase. If after all the courts and all the legislatures have their say, they decide that Joe Biden is president and he's sworn in on January 20th, I'll accept it. Will you commit to accepting it if Donald Trump is sworn in on the 20th after all the court challenges and stuff? No, because no court would ever. In other words, I am willing to follow the rule of the law. And there's a difference between law and right to some degree. There's a difference between what the law has said and what the reality is on occasion. And the best example I can think of this is Al Capone. Al Capone was convicted of tax evasion. Not because he wasn't a bootlegger and criminal and murderer, but because they could not prove in a court of law beyond a reasonable doubt the standard of evidence that he was. But everybody knew he was a bootlegger. You did not see people arguing, Al Capone is not a criminal. Al Capone is never a criminal. what the media is basically, what Donald Trump is saying, and what Giuliani is saying, and what Sidney Powell is saying, and what Lynn Wood is saying, and what I'm saying, is that this election was stolen, that there is a ton of evidence that this election was stolen, and that the history of what the Democrats do and voter fraud suggests that this is the case. Now, all the left has to do to win this is to have the courts decide that there is not sufficient evidence to overturn the election, or the electors decide there is not sufficient evidence for us to vote to send a different slate of electors. They don't have to convince you that there wasn't fraud. They don't have to convince you that it was everything was honest. They just have to convince people, oh, there's not enough. But that's not the game they're playing. They are like people shouting, Al Capone's no bootlegger. And that's why they're censoring. That's why they're keeping people out. That's why the benefits law post gets you banned on Twitter. Because if the general public, if enough of the general public is convinced that this election is stolen, then the state legislatures will have more guts. And I want to go over something that I wrote earlier. And I think it's very important to consider this, because there's a lot of people, oh, we have to move on. The Georgia Senate race is in danger and such. Yeah, and you Republicans are putting it in danger by not backing the president and not sticking the course and fighting this fight. Because this is getting ridiculous. And I want to point out a few things. And this is from a post of mine called Why Bataan, Why Corregidor? Maybe they were all nuts. Questions and incentives of the fedora. And, you know, as I've said many times, when you reward bad behavior, you get more of it. And I have some questions for our friends, both in the GOP establishment and on the right, who keep insisting we give up the fight. And before the cases go forward, before all of this stuff is done on the state and federal level. Now, this week, we saw at the D.C. rally in support of President Trump, conservatives once again physically attacked without consequences and without the media finding it newsworthy. That's true. What incentive will there be for such physical attacks against conservatives to be stopped if we concede quietly? This week, we saw bloggers deplatformed by their service provider because of pro-Trump administrative reporting. What's the incentives for hosting companies to stop doing this if we concede quietly? At Commentary Magazine, Seth Rothman had a piece titled, The Riots Won't End Themselves, Democrats Must End Them. Tell me, what incentive there is for those rioting to stop when they know they will not have to worry about a Trump Attorney General or Justice Department filing federal charges? We've already seen harassment of lawyers and law firms representing the president without any blowback. In fact, Giuliani mentioned already lawyers in hiding because of this. And that's more evidence of this, by the way, because if you have a weak argument, you don't threaten the lawyers. You do not threaten people if their argument is weak. You don't have to threaten them because they're not a danger. That's how weak they think the argument is. But take it as given. What is the incentive there for those doing this to stop at a GOP president when a media backed by the Democratic administration? Why would they stop doing this? We have seen social media platforms penalize those who present statistical evidence, including the steal of the presidential election, punished and locked out of accounts. And at the time I wrote this, I had been locked out by Twitter 3 times. It's up to 5, and by the time this podcast is done, it will be up to 6, almost certainly. What incentive is there for social media to treat the GOP in general, and conservatives in particular, fairly if the president's appeals disappear? Now, we've already seen members of the media, members of academia, and elected federal officials talking about punishing individuals who participated in the Trump administration or supported the Trump presidency. What incentive will there be for those people to avoid doing this once the president's appeals are dropped. We have clearly seen 4 major Democrat cities steal in 4 key states used to steal an election. We've seen this. What's the incentive for those major cities in other states, perhaps in red states, to not emulate these tactics if the blatant theft is allowed to stand? I mean, if an election can be stolen by these tactics in Philly, what makes you think Deep Blue Houston or Deep Blue Austin won't try this to flip Texas, assuming they've not already been doing this via Dominion? What makes you think they're going to stop at those states? And again, we've already seen moves by the left to attack the religious faithful on the grounds of discrimination. What's the incentive for the left to respect the rights of religious Americans if the president's team turns tail and runs? And finally, and this is a question that is so obvious that I'm almost ashamed that I have to bring this up. If the GOP quietly accepts Democrats stealing an election on the presidential level in such a blatant manner, what is the Democrats' incentive to not steal presidential elections from this point on? Answer: there is none. But that's only half the argument. Those are in respect the carrots. Let's play the stick for a second. You're Donald Trump. You have the ability to run again in 2024. By the way, I don't think he will. He'd be 78 in 2024. Donald Trump, if he doesn't run or doesn't advertise his intentions, becomes a threatened being. Because he's actually more, what's ironic is he's actually more dangerous to the left in general, not winning this election, because he remains a threatened being. If John McCain had won in 2008, Sarah Palin would have just been a vice president. You wouldn't have heard a lot about her. Because of that, because she lost, and because she left Alaska, she was free to take the steps that led to the Republican victory in 2010, that led to the election of Donald Trump in 2016. Donald Trump is in a position to do that. But let's be more blunt. If the Republican voters in Michigan, the Republican voters in Pennsylvania, if the Republican voters in Georgia, if the Republican voters in Arizona, if the Republican voters of Wisconsin, and I'm talking to Republicans in the House first, currently in the House of Representatives who won seats, if they're convinced that given the chance to stop Democrats from stealing this election, stealing their votes, remember, I'm in Massachusetts. Donald Trump didn't win here. I don't care how much stealing was going on. Donald Trump didn't win Massachusetts. He lost this state by a very large margin. I feel disenfranchised by this, what's happened. How do you think people who actually turned out for Trump in those key states feel on this? If they believe you have allowed this to happen, what's their incentive to vote for you? What's their incentive to support you? Or better yet, what's the incentive for them? I think there's an incentive for them to support a primary challenger. And what happens if Donald Trump shows up to campaign for that primary challenger? What happens if Donald Trump decides to hold a rally in Pennsylvania for the primary challenger of a Republican in the Congress who says, we need to drop this now? What do you think happens with that election? And let's go to the state level. Because a lot of state people, because the state legislatures are the guys who are going to matter. What do you think of the odds of, how great do you think the odds are going to be of a primary challenger to you state representatives who are right now, who Democrats are saying, you can't support this, it's going to destroy your career and such? You know what's going to destroy your career? If a primary challenger for state rep is endorsed by Stop the Steal. If a primary challenger is endorsed by Donald Trump, that'll do. That will end your career really fast. That'll end your career really quick. And if we lose an election cycle, so be it. People keep forgetting something about all of this. Conservatives aren't supporting Republicans because we're in love with the GOP. Conservatives are supporting Republicans because we have specific policy agendas that we think are best for the country and for our families. And right now, the GOP is the only party that is capable of delivering these things if they so choose. And remember, most of the time that you didn't. During the Donald Trump years, a ton of the agenda that we support was delivered. That's what we want. That's why we've supported him. And as Sarah Hoyt's put out, this is much bigger than Donald Trump right now. The stick is coming. If you won't do the right thing because it's the right thing, because it's the right thing for the democracy, for the right thing for the republic, because it's the right thing for the voters who elected you, and if it's the right thing for the people in your state who've had their voice stolen, then do the right thing because your freaking career is on the line. Because pro tip, it is. It is. Because we'll make you pay. We're not in love with the GOP because you're a member of the GOP. We vote GOP because you were the only. I mean, I quit the GOP because I saw some of the shenanigans going on here in Massachusetts. Didn't want to be a part of it. But I still vote for the Republicans because best shot of getting what I want done. If you're willing to surrender, forget it. You're not worth my time. You're not worth my effort. You're certainly not worth my contributions. Think about that. It's an important thing to think about. Now, granted, a lot of people aren't getting the message out because of the censorship. The benefits law stuff is hilarious when you think about it. Now, let's face facts. I'm a small blogger. I'm a D-list blogger. D is for Dominic. I'm not a big voice. I was once a bigger voice before things started happening to me, which in itself is an interesting story. But when it comes down to it, I'm not a huge voice. Yet I'm being censored with a lot of other people. Now, I want to get over to the Twitter censorship here. Because remember, all this censorship is because they don't want the argument to reach the general public. Because this is easy to understand. This is like arguing Al Capone is a bootlegger. Everyone understands that. Criminal gangs are distributing drugs in cities. Everyone understands that. But you got to nip this stuff in the bud. And one of the reasons why we're in this spot is because people decided they wanted to leave well enough alone. They didn't want to, it's too much trouble to mess with the Democrat machines. It's much better to just try and win more people. The technology for stealing elections is getting better. And human nature hasn't changed. I mean, haven't you ever heard of Tammany Hall? Back in the days when you had elections being stolen by the Tammany Hall machine, the famous cartoon by Thomas Nast, as long as I count the votes, what are you going to do about it? This stuff is a big part, and I regret to say a normal part of the political landscape. And it has been for decades, even centuries. And you're going to try and say, let's let it go. And people are saying, well, conventional wisdom says that there's not a chance. Let me remind you of some of the things that conventional wisdom said. Let me put it to you another way. And I'm going to actually tweet this out because actually this is important enough that I'm going to sit up because I want to type this out and tweet this out as I say it. I'm going to put the link to the podcast, try and get a few more eyes because By the way, in about 20 minutes or so, I'm going to get locked out of Twitter again. That's my prediction. 20 minutes, 25, and it'll be live during the podcast. So you'll be able to see me locked out in real time. And I should mention, I do my email on a separate computer. I don't do my email on the computer that I'm doing the podcast on. My nature. It's like my brother. He does all of his taxes on a separate computer that's kept offline and then brings a file over, which is a very smart thing for him to do. Of course, he's not well, so he probably won't be doing it for many more years. I need the back scratcher right now because I have a terrible, sorry to interrupt, but I have a terrible itch right here. And oh my God, that feels good. I'm sorry. Real life, this is all of this talk about the elections and stuff is important. But when you got an itch, that's real life. And real life takes precedence over everything else. Always remember this, by the way. Yes, I want you to watch the podcast. Yes, I want you to read the blog. Yes, I want you to kick in. Yes, I want you to give us some attention because I think it's worthwhile. But Twitter and all this stuff isn't real life. Real life is the person you're living with, your wife or child, your family. That's the first priority that should be in your life. And if that's not the first priority of your life, this stuff is important. Don't get me wrong. Selection is important. But the first priority in your life should be your life. And you should live that way. And I know a back scratcher and a little itch in your back is a weird way to bring that up, but it's important. And it's important enough to be worth saying. But let's get back to conventional wisdom. Okay, reminder. R.E.M. beer that the people who are telling the folks who support Stop the Steal, POTUS, Real Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, and Clyde. Yeah, I hope I'm spelling that right. Let me double check that thing here. D-N-E-Y. Sidney Powell on Twitter. That should be Sidney. That should be spelled, if I'm not mistaken, Sidney Powell 1. S-I-D-N-E-Y. Powell 1. I should capitalize those just in case there's allowing variations. Ones and fans who give up in 2020 are the ones who told you. Let's see. I'm gonna put the podcast in. I'm gonna try and do this in a wave to see if we can get a lot of things. Okay, so we're going to start rattling off a few of these things. Okay. Okay, so remember, the people who are telling the folks who support Stop the Steal, POTUS, Real Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, and Sidney Powell first, and MAGA fans to give up election 2020 challenges are the ones who told you the Steele dossier was real. Okay, and we're going to put this as one of question mark. Okay, so the people who told you that, they told you that the Steele dossier was real. They insisted to you that the Steele dossier was real and that Donald Trump had collided with the Russians and that all of this stuff was going on. Wasn't true. Let's go on. The people who are telling you that all of those folks that we have to give up on this election, those folks who tell us all that we have to surrender. This tweet isn't tweeting out as well. So let's fix that a little. It's two of the ones who told you. Hillary Clinton had election 2016 in a walk. And again, the same people. Oh, Hillary Clinton had this election in a walk. Very same people. Who said they told you that. They insisted to you that this was the case. Clinton had that election won. They told you that. Remember, the people who told you, the same people who are telling you to give up, stop the steal, to not fight this, that there is no point in fighting it. Are the same ones who told you the Democrats would expand their House seats. They're the same ones who told you the Dems would win House seats. Their House majority. They told you that. And there are people who believed it. The same people who told you that we need to drop this campaign, we need to give up, we need to surrender, the same people who told you that, told you no COVID in 2020. No chance for a COVID vaccine in 2020. They told you that. They insisted that that was the case. They told you that. That was absolutely right. The same people who told you give up this stuff were telling you that. No chance for a COVID vaccine. It's ridiculous to say that there would be a COVID vaccine. Totally impossible. Remember, the same people who are telling us to give up told us that the embassy would end war. They told you that moving the embassy to Jerusalem equals war. They told you that. We move the embassy to Jerusalem, there's going to be war all over the Middle East. That's what they told you. They assured you this was going to be the case. The same people who told you that we should give up are the same ones who said Romney was the best one to win in 2016. Same ones who told you that. Same ones. Romney's the guy. He's the centrist. He had the best chance. The same people who tell us to give up, to not fight this fight, the very same ones, both on the left and the right, are the ones who knew about Jeffrey and are the same ones who knew about Epstein and Weinstein. The same people. And said nothing. Said zip. Same people. The same people who tell us we should surrender and give up to these guys and trust that these elections are not being stolen and that there's no case here, are the ones who told you that Trump would never get the nomination. Trump would never get the Same people. Same people. They told you Trump never going to get nominated. The same people who tell you that we need to give up Donald, this attempt to, and let's face it, this is not just an attempted coup. This is a continuation of the coup that's been going on for the last 4 years. Ever since Trump won, there's basically been a coup. And it's been 24/7. Trump, the same people told you Trump had no chance win election 2016. The same people who were telling you that we should not be fighting this fight, that we should run away, are the ones that told you that stocks would crash under Trump. Same people told you that was going to happen. And I could go on for a very long time with this list. Why on earth would you trust these people? Remember this. Never forget this. Conventional wisdom is always 100% accurate, right up until the moment it isn't. The Soviet Union was going to stand forever, right up until it collapsed. Hillary Clinton was going to win election 2016, right up until the point she didn't. The Third Reich would last 1,000 years, right until it didn't. You'll never get Amy Coney Barrett in the Supreme Court. You'll never get all these things, right up until these things happen. That's the point here. That is the point. the people who are telling us to give up are not telling us to give up because they think we might lose, because they have something to lose. Either they're getting crumbs from the establishment, or they don't want to deal with the reality. And the reality is this. This is the big reality that nobody is touching on. For 10 years, Americans have been arming themselves heavily. What happens when those people who have been arming themselves heavily decide that participating in the democratic process is a waste of time? Do you know what happens? Actual civil war happens. Actual fighting happens. Actual killing happens. And let me point out to people that ain't pretty. Now, people say, but if we oppose these guys, Antifa's going to come out. You're going to have to beat Antifa sooner or later. You're going to have to face them sooner or later. They're going to have to be stopped sooner or later. And believe me, sooner is better. Sooner is better. That's what's going to happen. It's not going to happen. Is it going to happen this year? No. Because part of the question is, one of the problems, and this is one of the things that if Biden ends up being sworn in, he has one conundrum in that the Trump ending of regulations and the Trump economy provides the tax revenue for all the spending that they want. Now, they're not going to care about deficit spending at all. I mean, in fairness, Trump didn't care about all that much either, which is one of his faults. But the question is, do I throttle the economy and kill my tax base that I'm going to use to distribute to my friends? Or do I let it go and then try and claim credit for it? I think Biden would do the latter. Assuming that Biden's in charge. I mean, I'll have more to say about that when this develops. Now, I want to touch on a couple of odds and ends. But remember, all of these, but I want to reiterate this one more time. All this stuff that these people have been saying, you can't fight back, you mustn't fight back, you shouldn't fight back, it's destructive, it's all this, it's all that, are the same people who've been wrong on everything for the last 4 years and beyond. They've been wrong over and over and over again, and we're going to take their advice? We're going to actually take their advice and give up? What kind of idiots do we have to be to do this? You play the hand you have. Right now, we don't have a great hand. But you don't toss in your cards until you have to. And remember this again. They don't censor you if they think you have a bad argument. They don't hide this stuff. Biden doesn't hide in the basement if they thought Biden had a good argument. They don't hide these. They don't. If the Hunter Biden story was butkus, they don't kill it. If the charity business that just came out after the election, of course, just after the election, that Biden's cancer charity gave nothing to cancer. So research, and it was all in salaries. That doesn't get reported before they don't report that because they know what the reality is. You don't censor people if you think they have a persuasive case that you want to kill. It's as simple as that. Now, speaking of censorship, I want to get to my own censorship and what's been going on with Twitter. Now, there is a piece on Benefits Law. Now, Benefits Law is basically a law about the distribution of votes. It's used to to identify phony elections and phony accounting and so forth. I saw this piece about, I think, 10 days or so, 11 days ago. I'd have to go back for when my first lockdown took place. And I thought it was interesting, so I tweeted it out. No big deal. I just tweeted it out and went back to doing what I was doing. And suddenly went to Twitter. I was locked out. I was, hey, that's interesting. What am I locked out for? I checked my email. And it turned out that they were accusing me of distributing intimate images of people without their consent. And I'm like, seriously? This is a post on benefits law. It wasn't even my own post. But they had locked me out. So I was locked out for 12 hours. And when the 12 hours passed, I wrote an appeal. I was given the choice of deleting the tweet or appealing. And I appealed. And I said, the accusation is blatantly false. I have not distributed intimate images of anybody. And anybody who's saying that I am is a liar. This is a post on benefits law. And the reason why I'm looking the other way is I want to look up the last lock to make sure that I was accused of the same thing again. And so I did the appeal. And it said it could take up to 3 days. And then the appeal was approved. And I was restored. So I decided, all right, let's test this. I came back. I tweeted a few things. I said, now we're going to test and see if, since they apologized, obviously, they're going to, this thing shouldn't be locked again. So I announced on Twitter, I'm about to retweet this. You apologize. You said it was an error. Obviously, I won't get locked for this. I did that 1 hour after being restored. And I tweeted to Twitter saying, hey, I'm about to do this. And I got locked out again. I got the same form email saying, you have violated our rules against posting or sharing privately produced, distributed intimate media of someone without their express consent. And I said, this is ridiculous. There's no point. Why are you doing this? And, so I was locked out again for 12 hours. And when the 12 hours is up, I appealed again. And I said, not only is my basis of this appeal the same as before, but, you literally just apologized to me and said this was a mistake. Well, they ended up restoring me. I didn't get an email that time. And I think that's because the way I was trying to do the retweet, that I was restored. So I said, well, since you're going to do this, I'm going to do this again on my podcast. I'm going to give you a 50-hour notice that I'm about to do this. That I'm going to tweet out this tweet again because you said this is a mistake. I'm going to tweet out this thing. And I gave them a countdown every few hours, 50 hours, 30 hours, 20 hours. And lo and behold, I tried to do the podcast. The podcast suddenly drops. Last week's podcast, which is why last week's podcast is 5 minutes, suddenly dropped. My YouTube connection. What a coincidence that it suddenly dropped. A few minutes into it. Well, I did it anyways. And yeah, I was locked out again. Yeah, I was accused again. So then I again made the appeal and I again was restored. And the interesting thing about the third appeal was I literally was restored within 1 minute. The email that said, we received your appeal, was followed 1 minute later by an email saying, oh, we've restored you. Your appeal's right. We were a mistake. Silly mistake could have happened to anybody 3 times in a row. Well, then there were the hearings that were going on concerning censorship and Ted Cruz questioning Jack on this, under oath. Jack, oh, we're not censoring conservatives. I mean, it's just, we're not doing this type of thing. So I decided, you know what? This would be a great time to test the censorship again. Jack is on the stand right now saying that he's not censoring us. About almost everything. So I'm sorry. I decided to test it during the hearings while these people were actually on the side. Oh, we're not doing any of this stuff. That's just it's just crazy talk that we're doing any of this stuff. And I got locked out again. So I'm locked out for another 12 hours. And I appeal again. And this time, this is where it was funny. I figured that they must have this set to auto lockout, because what I did was, when I did the appeal, I put up the image. Here's the letter that says, "Oh, your appeal's been received," and then 1 minute later, "Oh, your appeal's been accepted," because someone read my letter in 1 minute and said, "Ooh, what a terrible mistake." So this time they didn't lock me out, restore me immediately. They restored me a day later. Still got the same thing. And so yesterday, after the Rudy Giuliani business, after the press conference, and he talked about the censorship of the press concerning this, I thought, this would be a great time to test this again. So I did, and I must admit, I had a little ulterior motive. I knew that I was supposed to work 4 to 2 in the morning. So I figured I'll try this out at just about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So if they lock me out for 12 hours, I'm at work anyways. Who cares? I'll come back. I'll do my appeal. They let us out at 12:30 early. So I ended up having to wait 20 minutes by the time I got home, and when I could have been sleeping. But that's beside the point. They, again, of course, locked me out. So now we come to the podcast. And now I'm about to see if I'm going to get locked out again. So I'm going to put the microphone here. And now we're going to go to, I'm going to go to Twitter here. Let me get the microphone propped properly. And I do apologize for doing this way. I know this annoys some of you, but this is the way I do things. Okay, now we've reached part the podcast where I've been talking Twitter censorship and the multiple times Twitter and Jack have locked me out for tweeting a post on a copy of said post from a site they haven't tagged yet. So what I'm going to do right now is, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put out the Benford's Law post someplace to make it so that it can be distributed. And I would urge you to tweet the post I'm about to tweet out, and retweet it as much as possible. It needs to go viral, specifically because the left has tried to keep it from going viral. Which is why they're doing this. Because again, the thing that makes the difference is the average people understanding what's going on. And if they understand it, then they're likely to object. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to continue on. I'm about to retweet the tweet that got me locked out again for the 5th time since the election. You can watch it live to see if I'm locked me live doing this on my podcast here. So let me put in the link to the live stream. Let's see if Twitter locks me out again. See if Twitter notwithstanding locks me out. Locks me out again. So I've now put those two things out there. I'm going to try and find the original tweet that I was locked out for. Let's see. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is I'm about to retweet the tweet that triggers the Twitter lockdown. Let's see what happens. Retweet. I've just retweeted the tweet. It usually takes about a minute for me to get locked down. Okay, I don't see it in my time stream, so I'm presuming that I'm locked down. I'm looking at my emails to see if I'm getting a notice from Twitter that I've been locked out again. Yes, my account has been locked. Hello, Peter and Jimmy. Your account, the Tech Guy blog, has been locked for violating the Twitter rules, specifically for violating our rules against posting or sharing privately produced, distributed and intimate media of someone without their express consent. Please note that repeated violations may lead to permanent suspension of your account. Proceed to Twitter to fix the issue with your account. So I obviously cannot tweet you. I would urge people to tweet out, the people watching, to tweet out that I've been locked again and that they've locked me for this now makes 6 times since the election that Twitter has locked me out of my account. And I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to keep putting this out, and I'm going to keep making them lock me out. I mean, yeah, it's some might say it's a useless protest. Some might say it's a useless thing to make them live up to their own rules, or to even try and make them live up to their own rules. But I want to remind you of something that John Quincy Adams did the same thing with the gag rule in the House of Representatives. He kept fighting it. Okay. I'm going to tell you this. It's going to be bad. I'm sorry. So when Kevin Williamson says, don't fight this stuff, when people are tweeting out, don't do this. That's just it. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm not going to buy these guys. Why should we believe the same people who have been telling us all these other things in the past? I mean, it's just ridiculous. I'm sorry. I'm not buying this stuff. This is Twitter. This is what they do. And they're not, and remember, they're not censoring me because they think I'm wrong. They're not censoring the benefits law post because they think it's BS. They're censoring it because they know it's not. And they censored, and they literally locked me out live while we were doing this. And I'm going to keep doing this. I am going to keep letting myself get locked out. And I'm going to keep making them do it. And I'm going to update my post over here. Update. Yep. Twitter locked me out live while I was on the air. I'd like to say I was surprised by this, but obviously I'm not. Well, I've got work and some things to do today, so I'm going to end this here. I want to thank you for joining us. If you joined me, I ask you, push this a little bit. Push this out to some people. I know there's some risk with Twitter, but the worst thing that happens is you lose Twitter. And if you lose Twitter, you're not losing much. So take care. Have a great one. We will see you next week. Next week, I'll probably be early again because it'll be the day after Thanksgiving. It's usually the busiest day of the year where I work. So it's going to be a lot to do. Actually, I didn't touch the odds and ends. I want to touch a few odds and ends before we go. I want to talk about a few non-political things. First of all, on the subject of sports, last Sunday's Patriots game was one of the worst ratings. The ratings keep going down for the NFL, keep going down. People don't understand it. People keep pretending that it's still not about the disrespect. Same with the NBA ratings. They keep trying to pretend that it's not to do with anything. The only ratings that have been good for the NFL have been games with Tom Brady. And who is Tom Brady associated with? Donald Trump. Yeah, I wasn't going to talk about politics, but I'm talking it there. But I think it's hilarious. But what's more hilarious is the Patriots won a game that they weren't expected to win last week. So they're going up to 4-5. You have never seen people so happy to be 4-5 in their life. I listen to sports talk radio. They're like, "Oh my God, we won this. We were 4-5. Yay!" The Patriots have not been as bad as 4-5 since before Brady. And now they're celebrating it. It's very hilarious to watch it happen. The Red Sox have rehired Alex Cora, which is very funny. And again, the same people who are outraged over a World Series being stolen. Oh, don't want to bother with an election. And yeah, Cora's over there. And Cora in his interview, Cora talked about how, yeah, people were rejecting because we didn't do this stuff here because people kind of knew about it and didn't want us to do it. In other words, people knew about it. People know about these elections being stolen. And I want to put something here on Instapundit. Remember, conventional wisdom is always right until the point it isn't. And remember who the people who are saying don't fight were saying for the last 4 years plus. Now I'm going to throw in that Twitter thread. I'll be able to copy it in there. Locked out again during my podcast. 6th time Twitter has locked me out since the election. So So we're going to put that link there. And we're going to see what people say. People may say something about it or not. Retail sales, like I talked about the economy. Economy is still doing well, but now we're starting to see an uptick on job losses, the first time in a while, because people are talking about lockdowns again. And I'm telling you, it is going to be the one good thing about a Biden presidency will be watching some of the failures that will go on. Those failures, it's not good watching those failures because they're going to be failures for the country and it's going to hurt a lot of people. That's bad. There are reports. There are reports out of let's see. I lost my train of thought. Out of China, that a retired Chinese bishop is saying basically that the Pope's been taken in by these guys, or the people involved from relying on this stuff. That we're seeing the Pope playing games with these guys is really sad. It's bad for the church. It's bad for people overall. Terrible, terrible thing. The other odds and ends that I wanted to touch on. Talked about that. Oh, my kid. There's a very big thing about being careful of what you wish for. My youngest son is finally moving out of the house, and it is occurring to me that all of the man jobs are going to be mine again. I'm going to have to do all the shoveling. I'm going to have to do the snow blowing. I'll have to do all the lawn mowing and so forth. And that stinks. I'm getting old for this sort of thing. That's the side effect of everybody moving out, is that you get stuck with all the jobs again. It's a terrible thing. Oh, speaking of church, with the COVID restrictions, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Christmas masses and things like that. I know at our own church, people are debating over how they're going to do it, because you can only have so many people, but they want to try and accommodate everyone. So that should be interesting. I'm trying to think. There was something else I wanted to talk about, and I'll remember it as soon as the podcast is over. But I just can't place it. But anyways, thank you for staying with me as long as you have. You have a great rest of the day, and we will be back next week, probably between 10 and 11 o'clock, depending on what time I have to go into work. You have a great one. See you soon again.